Admiral Koros stood frozen before the quantum display, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. The pulsing red dot on the star chart shouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. Not after 2 centuries of silence. Not after everything they had done to ensure that particular sector remained dark. "Run the analysis again," he ordered, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. The command center fell silent, the usual bustle of activity grinding to a halt as technicians exchanged nervous glances. "Sir, we've already verified the signal 7 times, Lieutenant Dima replied, her voice wavering. "The signature is unmistakable." Koros closed his upper eyes, a gesture of deep distress among Veldarians. "Lock down this information. Security Protocol Omega-9. No transmissions leave this room." The Admiral turned to face the gathered officers, his scaled skin shifting from its usual calm azure to a mottled purple of extreme agitation. "I need to convene the High Command immediately. This is..." He paused, searching for words that wouldn't trigger panic, a situation of historical significance. The euphemism wasn't lost on his senior staff. They knew. Not all of them had been alive during the event, but every Veldarian officer knew the stories. The quarantined sector, the species they had encountered there, the humiliation that followed. "Sir," ventured Commander Pelax, the youngest of his officers, "should we begin preliminary defense preparations? Perhaps alert the border fleets?" Koros fixed him with a hard stare. "And cause an empire-wide panic?" "No, we follow protocol. We contain this information while we determine appropriate action." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "We do not repeat the mistakes of the past." As the officers dispersed to their duties, Admiral Koros remained before the display, staring at the pulsing signal. Humans. After all this time, the humans had broken their quarantine. The creatures who had taken an elite Veldarian battle fleet and sent back only broken ships and broken minds. The enemy that haunted the nightmares of military strategists for generations. The beings whose very name had become synonymous with disaster. "Computer," he said quietly, "retrieve historical file VX 7729. Authorization Koros Prime." "Warning," the synthetic voice responded. "Accessing restricted historical archives requires Supreme Command clearance." Override. Emergency protocol. The Earthers have returned. The computer paused for a beat longer than normal. Even the artificial intelligence seemed reluctant to acknowledge this reality. "Access granted." Displaying classified file, First Contact War Earth Campaign Final Report. The screen filled with images that had been censored from public archives for 2 centuries. Koros felt his heart racing as he prepared to face the uncomfortable truth his civilization had tried so hard to forget. The holographic display flickered as classified footage from 2 centuries past materialized before Admiral Koros. The timestamp read, Galactic Standard Year 2823, First Contact with Species Designation H1. Koros had seen these records only twice in his long career, once during his advanced tactical training, and again when he assumed command of the Imperial Defense Fleet. "Computer, engage privacy shields," he ordered. The windows of his office darkened as he settled into his chair, bracing himself for the uncomfortable history lesson. The footage showed the majestic Veldarian battleship Eternal Dominance approaching a blue-green planet in an unremarkable solar system. Grand Admiral Jackson, the most decorated fleet commander in Imperial history, narrated with absolute confidence. "We have detected primitive radio transmissions from the 3rd planet. Scans indicate a pre-spatial civilization with rudimentary nuclear capabilities. Standard protocol for resource-rich worlds is in effect. We will demonstrate our superiority, accept their surrender, and establish a Class 3 extraction colony." Koros couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the arrogance. The Veldarian Empire had conquered 300 worlds using this exact approach. Show up, shock and awe the natives, accept their surrender, extract resources. Simple, effective, predictable. Until Earth. The next segment showed landing craft descending toward a landmass. North America, according to the overlay. The chosen demonstration site was a military installation in a desert region. The plan had been elegantly simple: destroy their strongest military base, broadcast terms of surrender, and be home for the Emperor's Jubilee celebration. Warning. Incoming projectiles detected. An automated alert blared through the recording. What followed still stunned Koros, despite having reviewed the footage before. The primitive humans, using nothing more sophisticated than chemical propellants and basic targeting systems, managed to destroy 3 of the 5 landing craft. Pure luck, the official report had claimed, but Koros knew better. The humans had observed the attack pattern and adapted with terrifying speed. The recording jumped ahead 12 hours. Grand Admiral Jackson, his usual composure shattered, was delivering an emergency transmission. The humans have captured Lieutenant Zeph's craft intact. They are taking it apart. Stars help us. They are taking apart our technology and understanding it. Request immediate reinforcements. These creatures learn too quickly. Another jump, 3 days later. A haggard Jackson, blood crusting on his facial scales, transmission breaking up. They've reversed our shield frequencies. Somehow they've adapted their primitive nuclear weapons to penetrate our defenses. The Eternal Dominance has sustained critical damage. Half the fleet is lost. These humans, they don't fight like civilized beings. They don't surrender when outmatched. They just keep coming, keep adapting. We never should have the transmission cut abruptly. Final footage, the Imperial Council chamber, 1 week later. The surviving ships limping home. The Emperor himself, eyes closed in shame, issuing the unprecedented order. Let it be recorded that Solar System Sol 3 is hereby designated Quarantine Zone Alpha. No Imperial vessel shall approach within 2 light years of this system. All records of encounter with species H1 human shall be classified beyond top secret. This defeat shall not become known to our people or our rivals. The senior military counselor's voice, heavy with disbelief. Your Majesty, surely we can assemble a proper invasion force. No, the Emperor's scales had flushed crimson with rage and humiliation. You don't understand what we've awakened. Their adaptation rate is unprecedented. Given time, they will learn from what little technology they've captured. But if we leave them alone, it will take centuries before they could threaten us. Containment is our only logical option. The projection faded, leaving Koros sitting alone in the darkness of his office. 200 years of denial. 200 years of pretending the quarantine was for scientific research purposes. 200 years while the shame festered in their collective psyche, whispered about in military academies but never openly discussed. And now, the quarantine had failed. The humans were out there again, their signal blazing across space like a declaration. Koros felt a chill travel down his spine. How much had they learned in 2 centuries? How far had they advanced? And most terrifyingly, did they remember the Veldarians? The Grand Council chamber of the Veldarian Empire had not been convened for an emergency session in over 30 years. Now, barely 6 hours after Admiral Koros's discovery, the vast amphitheater buzzed with anxious energy as the Empire's highest officials filed in. Rumors had spread despite security protocols. Something serious enough to pull counselors from their beds in the middle of the sleep cycle had to be catastrophic. Emperor Nexarvi entered last, his ceremonial robes hastily donned, the traditional makeup that usually concealed his age notably absent. He took his place at the center of the raised platform, flanked by military and scientific advisors. Admiral Koros stood rigidly to his right. This council is now in emergency session, the Emperor announced, skipping the usual 20 minutes of formal pleasantries. What we discuss here today does not leave this chamber. Admiral Koros, proceed. Koros stepped forward, activating the central holographic display. Approximately 9 hours ago, our deep space monitoring station in the Proxima sector detected this. The signal appeared above the council floor, a complex waveform rotating slowly. The signature matches nothing in our current database. However, he paused, clearly uncomfortable. When cross-referenced with historical archives, we found a match. The display changed to show a split screen, the new signal alongside a much simpler pattern from the classified archives. "These are humans," Koros stated flatly. A collective intake of breath swept through the chamber. Most counselors had only heard whispers about humans, but every Veldarian knew something terrible lurked behind the quarantine zone. The signal originated from a vessel moving at Koros hesitated, approximately 18% of light speed, using a drive system our analysts cannot identify. This represents a technological leap that should have taken them at least another 4 centuries to achieve. Science Minister Nara pushed forward. "We've analyzed the signal thoroughly. It contains elements suggesting quantum entanglement communication technology we ourselves only perfected 90 years ago. The humans appear to have gone from primitive radio to advanced quantum physics in 2 centuries. "How is this possible?" demanded Trade Counselor Vazix. "Even with the small amount of technology they captured from our ships, they should not have advanced this quickly." "That's precisely what makes humans dangerous," replied General Martin, the oldest military officer present. "They don't progress linearly like civilized species. They make evolutionary leaps. He struggled for words. "They thrive on crisis and competition in ways our psychologists still cannot comprehend." The chamber erupted into overlapping arguments. Emperor Nexar raised a hand for silence. "What options do we have?" he asked simply. Defense Minister Euler stood. "We should immediately dispatch a battle fleet to intercept this vessel. Destroy it before they can alert their homeworld that they've been detected. And if they've already developed better weapons than we have," countered Admiral Koros, "we could trigger the very conflict we've spent 2 centuries avoiding." "Perhaps diplomacy," suggested Ambassador Plex. "If they've advanced this far, maybe they've also matured culturally." General Martin laughed mirthlessly. "Have you not heard anything? These creatures reverse-engineered our technology after a brief encounter. They don't think like us. They don't behave predictably. But they're just one planet. We are an empire of thousands of worlds," shouted Counselor Draz. Science Minister Talara's voice cut through the chaos. "Based on the signal's complexity and the velocity of their ship, our models suggest they have likely established colonies beyond their home system already. This is not a single vessel from a single world. This is the advance wave of a species that has broken its quarantine." The silence that followed felt heavier than the atmosphere of a gas giant. "Stars help us all," whispered the Emperor, his scales paling to a sickly white. "We may already be too late." The council chamber's doors slid open unexpectedly, drawing all eyes to a slender Veldarian dressed in civilian clothes. Unlike the ornate attire of the counselors, this individual wore a simple gray jumpsuit with no markings of rank or station. His scales were dull, almost colorless, a cosmetic modification common among those who wished to blend in with various species. "Who dares interrupt?" began the security minister before Emperor Nexar raised a hand for silence. "Agent Trell," the Emperor acknowledged with a slight nod. "Your timing is either impeccable or suspicious." The newcomer bowed deeply. "Impeccable, Your Majesty. My handlers notified me of this emergency session. Given the subject matter, I believed my report could not wait." Admiral Koros stepped forward. "For those unaware, Agent Trell heads our deep cover observation network. He has spent the last 40 years monitoring developments beyond the quarantine zone." Whispers rippled through the chamber. Most counselors hadn't known such a network existed. "Speak freely," Agent ordered the Emperor. Trell approached the central platform, his movements betraying exhaustion. "For 4 decades, I've coordinated our surveillance of human expansion. We established listening posts disguised as debris edge of their solar system. Later, as they began venturing outward, we placed observers on their colonies. He smiled grimly. Do you know how difficult it is to make a Veldarian look human? Quite painful, I assure you. He activated a personal data device, transferring information to the main display. A series of images appeared, human spacecraft of increasingly sophisticated design, orbital habitats, planetary colonies. The signal you detected is from their third-generation interstellar vessel. They call it the Pathfinder. However, Trell's voice grew tight. That ship is already obsolete by their standards. It was launched 11 years ago. Obsolete. Then why are we only detecting it now? Demanded Science Minister Nara. Because they've developed something new. Trell displayed an image of an oddly shaped device. They've created a method of propulsion that folds space-time. Not entirely unlike our phase drives, but operating on principles our scientists declared theoretically impossible. How? General Martin's voice was barely audible. Trell's expression darkened. The wreckage we left behind. Remember the 3 ships they shot down during first contact? The humans didn't just study them, they built their entire technological revolution around them. They call it reverse engineering, but it's more than that. They don't just copy, they improve. New images appeared machinery that looked disturbingly similar to Veldarian designs, but with obvious modifications. This was recovered from one of their research facilities by one of my operatives who didn't survive the extraction. It's a modified version of our quantum communication array. The operative's final report indicated it functions at 320% the efficiency of our current models. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. My latest intelligence suggests they have surpassed us in weapons technology, propulsion, and computing. But what truly makes them dangerous is their methodology. Trell looked around the chamber. We innovate through careful, methodical research. Humans innovate through crisis and competition. They have thousands of separate research entities all working on the same problems simultaneously, sharing information, building on each other's failures and successes. Then our worst fears are realized, whispered the Emperor. They're not just free from quarantine. They're superior to us. Not entirely, Your Majesty, Trell responded quietly. Not yet. But my predictive models give us less than 10 years before they surpass us in all technological categories. And here's the most disturbing part. They have never forgotten us. They've been preparing for our return since the day we retreated. Following Agent Trell's sobering report, all eyes turned to General Morbin. The weathered military commander had risen through the ranks during the border wars and was known for his unvarnished tactical assessments. Now, he stood before the council with a grim expression that made even the Emperor shift uncomfortably. "Counselors, Your Majesty," Morbin began, his voice gravelly from years of command. "I've spent the last hour reviewing our current military readiness against Agent Trell's intelligence. I'll be direct. A conventional conflict with humans would be catastrophic for the Empire." He activated his tactical display, splitting the hologram into comparative columns. Our fleet consists of 8,500 capital ships spread across 4,000 star systems. While impressive against our current rivals, this creates a fundamental defensive posture. We cannot concentrate force quickly due to the travel time between systems. The display showed a simulation of Veldarian ships converging from across the Empire, a process that would take months. Meanwhile, Agent Trell's intelligence suggests the humans have fewer ships, perhaps 2,000 of equivalent size, but their advanced propulsion systems mean they can concentrate their entire fleet anywhere within their territory in days, not months. During military terms, this gives them operational superiority, despite numerical disadvantage. Defense Minister Euler leaned forward. "But surely our technological edge is likely gone," Morbin interrupted, an unprecedented breach of protocol that demonstrated his urgency. "Our weapons technology has advanced only incrementally over 2 centuries. Their rate of development has been exponential. He switched the display to show footage from human entertainment media images of space battles that Trell's agents had collected from their broadcasts. This is how they conceptualize warfare. Note the emphasis on mobility, unpredictable attack vectors, and asymmetric engagements. They don't fight like we do. The Veldarian military doctrine relies on overwhelming force applied in predictable patterns that have worked for millennia. Humans seem psychologically incapable of following conventional tactics. They innovate constantly, even in the middle of battle. Science Minister Nara spoke up. Their irrationality makes them unpredictable, but surely also inefficient. Morbin laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Or on the contrary, what we perceive as irrationality is their greatest weapon. Our military simulations assume opponents will make logical decisions to preserve force strength. Humans routinely sacrifice short-term advantages for long-term gains. They willingly accept casualties that would be unthinkable in our military culture if they see strategic benefit. He gestured to a final display, a comparison of psychological profiles. This may be the most critical factor. When Veldarians face defeat, we retreat to preserve our forces. It's logical, efficient. When humans face defeat, they often become more aggressive, more innovative, and more determined. In the first contact incident, each setback they suffered seemed to intensify their resistance rather than diminish it. Emperor Nexar stared at the projections with undisguised concern. Your assessment then, General? Morbin's scales dulled to the gray of deep resignation. In a direct military confrontation, my analysis suggests we would ultimately face defeat. Not immediately, but inevitably. Their adaptability would overcome our advantages of scale within a standard war cycle. The silence that followed hung like a death sentence over the chamber. Emperor Nexar rose from his seat, scales shifting through colors that reflected his internal turmoil. The council chamber, once filled with confident voices debating routine matters of state, now hummed with an undercurrent of dread. I require options, Nexar stated, his voice deliberately measured. Options that preserve both our security and our dignity. The Veldarian Empire does not cower, even in the face of unexpected developments. Everyone present understood the subtext. Find a solution that wouldn't reveal to their citizens or rival powers just how terrified the leadership had become. Trade Counselor Vazix was the first to recover his composure. Perhaps we could approach this as a commercial opportunity. Establish contact through neutral traders, gauge their intentions without revealing our concerns. And if their intentions are conquest? Defense Minister Euler countered. We still have numerical superiority. A preemptive strike targeting their primary worlds could cripple them before they fully mobilize. General Morbin snorted derisively. Did you not hear my assessment? A preemptive strike would only ensure we face their full wrath. Based on their psychological profile, humans would view such an attack as justification for total war. The general is correct, Agent Trell added. My intelligence indicates they maintain something called a dead hand protocol. Any significant attack on their core worlds would trigger automatic retaliation, even if their leadership were eliminated. Ambassador Plex cleared her throat. What about genuine diplomacy? We've spent centuries assuming the worst, but we have no actual evidence of human hostility since our initial miscalculation. Except for the fact that they've been arming themselves with increasingly deadly weapons for 200 years, Security Minister Ranix pointed out. Weapons specifically designed to counter our technology. The room descended into factional bickering. The military coalition advocated for defensive preparations while maintaining quarantine. The commerce faction pushed for careful economic engagement. The diplomatic corps suggested formal contact with extensive safeguards. Emperor Nexar observed the debate with growing frustration. Enough. These are all half measures based on fear. With respect, Your Majesty, Admiral Koros interjected, our fear may be justified. If humans have indeed surpassed us technologically, Any aggressive action could be catastrophic. Then perhaps, suggested Science Minister Nara, we should consider more subtle approaches. We could release technological baits apparent vulnerabilities in our systems that contain hidden surveillance mechanisms. Security Minister Ranix leaned forward eagerly. Or deploy deep cover agents to key human worlds. If we could infiltrate their command structure, they would detect any Veldarian operative, no matter how well disguised. Trell interrupted. Their bioscanners have become remarkably sophisticated. Emperor Nexar paced the center of the chamber, his ceremonial robes swirling around him. Do you realize what's happening? We're scheming like a minor power facing a superior force. We're acting as if defeat is inevitable. No one spoke. No one needed to. The realization hung in the air. The Veldarian Empire, dominant power in the galaxy for millennia, was genuinely afraid. What if they're watching us now? Whispered Counselor Dres suddenly, eyes darting to the shadows of the chamber. What if they've had the capability to monitor our communications all along? The suggestion sent a visible shudder through the assembly. Emperor Nexar's scales flashed warning colors. This paranoia is unbecoming of imperial leadership, he snapped, though his own unease was evident. We need solutions, not fears. But the seed had been planted. Around the table, counselors and ministers glanced at one another with new suspicion. Who among them might be compromised? How deep might human infiltration have gone? And worst of all, had the humans known all along that they were being watched? Amid the escalating tension, a voice spoke from the far edge of the council chamber. Your Majesty, honored counselors, I request permission to present an alternative strategy. All eyes turned to locate the speaker. She stood in the junior advisors section, a young Veldarian female with unusually bright scales and the distinctive insignia of the Strategic Analysis Division. Who addresses the Emperor without recognition? Demanded Protocol Minister Genax. Mom. Strategic Analyst Nara Vex, Imperial Think Tank, she replied, stepping forward without waiting for formal permission. Her youth was startling in this chamber of elders, perhaps 60 years old, barely into Veldarian adulthood. Emperor Nexar studied her with curiosity. The think tank sends a junior analyst to an emergency council session? Interesting. Speak, strategist Nara. Nara approached the central platform with confidence that belied her age. We're approaching this situation from the wrong perspective. We're treating humans as an enemy to be feared or a threat to be eliminated. Instead, we should view them as a potential asset. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the chamber. Nara activated the display, showing a series of probability models. Instead of hiding from human advancement, I propose we embrace it. Openly approach them with an offer of technological alliance and cultural exchange. We present ourselves as impressed equals, not returning conquerors. General Morbin laughed harshly. While secretly preparing our defenses, I assume? Do you think humans wouldn't see through such transparent manipulation? They would absolutely suspect our motives, Nara agreed readily. But that's where human psychology becomes our advantage. According to Agent Trell's reports, humans possess an almost pathological need to prove themselves. If we approach them as technological equals seeking partnership, their cultural impulse would be to demonstrate their capabilities. She displayed a complex psychological model. Their society is built on competition as much as cooperation. By engaging them directly, we gain intelligence on their true capabilities while establishing diplomatic channels that could prevent immediate conflict. Admiral Koros frowned. You're suggesting we intentionally expose ourselves to a potentially superior power? I'm suggesting controlled exposure is better than waiting for them to find us, Nara countered. Every day we delay, they grow stronger, while we merely maintain. Additionally, this approach fractures their response. Their political structure is divided into competing nation-states. Some will advocate for cooperation, others for caution. This division buys us time. Defense Minister Euler leaned forward. And while we engage them diplomatically, we accelerate our military modernization, of course, Nara replied with a slight smile, using the very technologies they showcase to us. It's a delaying tactic, yes, but one that gives us options beyond simple capitulation or doomed conflict. Security Minister Rannick shook his head dismissively. The naive optimism of youth. I was there during first contact. Humans cannot be predicted or manipulated so easily. With respect, Minister, Nara replied, that's precisely why this approach might succeed where conventional strategy would fail. They'll expect deception. They'll anticipate aggression. They won't expect genuine offers of cooperation, even if our ultimate motives are self-preservation. Emperor Nexar's scales had settled into the deep blue of decision. After hours of debate, the council chamber had grown quiet, exhaustion replacing fear as the dominant emotion. Strategist Nara's proposal offers the most viable path forward, the Emperor declared. However, we will implement it with certain safeguards. Admiral Koros nodded in agreement. The diplomatic mission will proceed under my personal oversight. We'll select a delegation of our finest scientists and cultural experts. But each vessel in the diplomatic fleet will be equipped with our latest defensive systems and emergency phase drives. And simultaneously, added General Morbin, his tone grudging but respectful, we'll begin the largest military mobilization since the Proxima Rebellion. Quietly, of course. Ships repositioned under the guise of training exercises, weapon systems upgraded as routine maintenance. Strategist Nara bowed deeply. A wise modification, Your Majesty. Engagement without vulnerability. Emperor Nexar surveyed the exhausted council. The irony of our situation is not lost on me. 2 centuries ago, we approached humans as conquerors, certain of our superiority. Now we approach them as cautious equals, uncertain of our standing. His mouth curved in a bitter smile. Perhaps there's a lesson in humility here that the Empire needed to learn. If we survive the education, muttered Security Minister Rannick. The diplomatic mission will depart within 20 days, announced the Emperor. We must move quickly before. An urgent tone interrupted him as Lieutenant Dima rushed into the chamber, protocol forgotten in her haste. Your Majesty, counselors. She paused, fighting to regain composure. Our monitoring stations have detected additional signals. Many additional signals. The central display activated, showing a star map of the region surrounding the quarantine zone. Dozens of red dots pulsed across previously empty sectors. We're tracking at least 37 distinct vessels using the same propulsion signature, Dima reported, her voice barely steady. They appear to be moving in a coordinated pattern, establishing positions along our outer territories. Admiral Koros stepped forward, eyes fixed on the display. They're not approaching directly. They're surrounding us. No, Agent Trell whispered, his face ashen. They're establishing a perimeter. Standard human military doctrine: secure the operational zone before engagement. The implications settled over the council like a shroud. Their careful plans, their measured response, all rendered meaningless in an instant. How long have these vessels been in position? Demanded Emperor Nexar. Lieutenant Dima swallowed hard. Based on their current locations and estimated velocities, at least 6 months, Your Majesty. The chamber fell silent as the truth became undeniable. The humans hadn't just broken quarantine. They hadn't just sent a single exploratory vessel. They had deployed an entire fleet that had maneuvered into strategic positions throughout Veldarian space without being detected until now. General Morbin voiced what everyone was thinking. They've been watching us all along, waiting, preparing. Emperor Nexar's scales had faded to the pale gray of dawning horror. Waiting for what? As if in answer, every communication device in the chamber activated simultaneously. On every screen, the same message appeared not in Veldarian script, but in perfect Imperial standard. The Terran Confederation extends greetings to the Veldarian Empire. After 200 years, we believe it's time we had a proper introduction. Shall we talk?